Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. In this episode, we hope to help you thrive in life and leadership. And I want to tell you about two things before we dive in. First of all, how is your team culture? You know, my friends at Leader have an assessment for you to really tell whether your employees are engaged or not. You can check it out at leader.com/culture. That's leadr.com/culture. Just click the link. And I've got something for you called the Preaching Cheat Sheet. I've been communicating, preaching, giving keynote talks for over 30 years. And there's a hard way to do it and an easy way to do it. And I can't do the hard work of coming up with great content, but I can show you how to do it better, faster, and far more efficiently so that you can really focus on what matters. I've got 10 steps inside the cheat sheet that will help you get to a great talk faster starting right now. You can just click on the link or go to preachingcheatsheet.com. That's preachingcheatsheet.com. And now to today's episode. JP, welcome back.
Hey, Carey, thank you so much for having me on. I love your podcast. It's an honor to be a guest.
Well, I appreciate you as a leader. It's been good to hang out in real life and hang out online and text and that kind of stuff. But I think last time we caught up here on the podcast, it was mid-pandemic. And you said some stuff. I remember that episode just got a lot of downloads as leaders shared it. You were talking about redoing your messages for YouTube. I think it was one of your children who said, "Dad, that's too boring," or whatever, right? Always the kids who are the best thing. But I'd love to know, now we're back into a more normal world. What are you learning about preaching and reaching people? Have you pivoted back? Like, what are you doing with your teaching that might be different than it was 4 years ago? Or did you just revert back to normal?
Yeah, so what happened was in the pandemic, my kids loved watching these YouTubers, and it was the flash frames, the quick movement, the entertainment, the words on screen. And as churches move into the homes, I'm like, what can we learn from that? And so I contracted with some YouTubers just to have them advise us and coach us and to see what we can do during the pandemic to stream into homes. And so now people have returned, and this is interesting because I met about this morning. So at Harris Creek, at our campus here in Waco, we are at capacity. And so we have 1,100 seat auditorium, and we're running 3 services, and they're about 120 to 125% full. Actually, on some Sundays, 150% full. So we'll have overflow 400 or 500 in overflow on some Sundays into the commons, which is our lobby. So we're navigating those space issues. So here's the conversation that I had with the elders this morning: is can we ask people who are not in need of kids ministry to meet in their homes together though and stream the services, and then have lunch afterwards and really spend the majority of Sunday together? Like, would that be an experience that would be conducive to, the assembly that Jesus had in mind, the kind of home church idea? And so as we think about growth, we're exploring building. We bought some land. The cost of construction is just so high right now. I'm like, is there a smarter way to use technology? And so that's kind of the first answer to your question. And then I can go into, what we're doing to raise up communicators and preachers and thinking about those kinds of things.
So let's go there. But just to clarify, so you're saying watch the service at home if you don't have need of kids ministry, and then gather later for like a meal or something like that? Would that be in homes or church-based, or what would that look like?
So we have a small group model. We call them life groups, community groups, home groups, cell groups. Different people call them different things, but small group model. And so any member of Harris Creek is in a small group. And so they're meeting, if they're married, they're meeting with 4 to 6 other couples on a consistent basis. If they're single, they're meeting with 6 to 12 other single friends on a consistent basis. That's their life group. And so I'm asking the question, hey, what if we had life groups meet on Sunday in homes together? So you would say, hey, let's have all of our life group go to John's house. John has a theater room or a media room. We'll go up there. We'll all watch the service together, and then we'll all share a meal. We'll do a potluck in the kitchen afterwards. We'll bring something, and we'll all eat. We'll discuss the service, see what we're learning, and experience community. And there's a cost. You're always choosing your problems in leadership. There's certainly a cost to that model, but I think for some people in the stage of life that they're in, that could be more conducive to a discipleship church experience than even coming and gathering corporately, with the other members.
As someone whose kids are grown, that's actually rather attractive. And we're doing a version of that right now. We'll still attend in person, although we do have capacity issues right now too. But we are sharing a meal and then doing small group on Sundays, which is really cool. Okay. So then, and tell me, are you still doing a message straight to video for YouTube, or you're streaming live, or what are you doing for the message on Sunday morning?
Yeah, all the above. So we're streaming live to YouTube, to Facebook, to the Harris Creek app, harriscreek.org. So we're streaming. We're doing the 2 morning services. Our evening service is predominantly college service right now. We're reconsidering that as well. But something that's a distinctive of Harris Creek is we want to be a communicator school. So a lot of churches will bring people in, communicator training school. Churches will bring people in and they'll train up the resources and they're afraid to lose them. Right. They'll hold them tightly. Hey, don't poach my people. I really want to be a sending church. And traditionally that means a planting church. But no, I'm more interested in church revitalization because I'm down here in the Bible Belt. There's a church on every corner. And if somebody already has a building and a congregation and a people and a gathering space, what if we sent leaders into those places? And so all that means is losing resources to the right people that will give them authority and autonomy to lead as they've learned. And so that doesn't mean that we have the edge on leadership. We've paid a lot of dummy tax along the way. I've learned a lot of things from people much smarter than me. And so we want to raise up these leaders. And so people are moving here that desire to learn about preaching and teaching. And then they kind of go into this preaching leadership school, all in hopes to not be planted per se, but actually to get a job at another existing church, hopefully in a position of leadership, like a lead pastor job or a senior pastor job.
That's a great approach. How are you developing them? Are you putting them on the main stage, youth stages? What are you doing?
That's right. So it's on the job training, as you can imagine, with ministry. So much of what they're doing is in small groups with pastoral care, learning how to counsel through the scriptures and lead through the scriptures. We gather every Tuesday as an entire staff where, some of that's a Q&A, they ask questions. And then on the communication front, every Monday we start in a room. So I'm an extrovert. So I'm not this kind of lock me in a room with commentaries. I love to prepare with people. There's about a dozen proverbs that say wisdom comes from the counsel of many. And so I want that to kind of carry my preparation or the sermon prep process. So we gather on Monday and we just talk about the message. Hey, what are we talking about? What scriptures speak into this? What is the passage? How do we want to break down this passage? What's an opening image? I follow an outline. It's image, subject, need, preview, text, summary, conclusion. And so those are the first words that go on the Word document. And then we begin to fill in those blanks collectively. And then the communicator, let's say it's me, I leave there and then I just kind of think on that, see the world through that lens. And then on Thursday, I write the message. It's done by Thursday at 2:30. Thursday at 3, I step on stage and I give the message to that panel of people, those developing communicators, for a grade 1 to 100, 70 is passing. And so they have the outline in front of them. They take notes on the outline. They then give me a grade and why, and then we do a play-by-play, page-by-page feedback. And then I take that outline that they've spoken into and I reshape it and then preach it 3 times on Sunday. Now, if one of them is going, they step into that process. So I will preach about half of the Sundays and I will give away the other half to them. If they've never taught before in their life, Carey, of course, we're going to start them on a smaller stage and give them other opportunities, like you said, in students or just the nature of the gathering. There's no shortage of opportunities to speak. But as they grow as a communicator, they will have an opportunity on Sunday to teach to the thousands that are here in person, but then also the thousands that are watching online.
Wow. That's a really interesting process. I've heard others do a similar thing. But that idea of what does Tim Lucas call it? Tim, do you know Tim from Liquid Church? He'll call it gospel hour or something like that, where he does a very similar thing. And you're being critiqued. Craig Rochelle has a variation of that process.
Yeah,
and
Craig and I've talked about it at length recently even. So
yeah. And what are the benefits? Like, how much better typically does a message get? I guess there's twofold to that. One, it's going to be evaluated, so you probably do a better job up front, right? Like, okay, I'm going to have to at least get a 70%. I love that it's 70, not 90, because it's hard to hit 9 out of 10 every week.
Yeah.
And then, what does that do to the creative process? And also, do you think the quality of the messages you're preaching?
So I've been doing this for about 10 years, and people initially have been very resistant to it. And so if you've never preached a sermon just to a fairly empty room, but just a panel of critics for a grade, it is a little nerve-wracking. And especially if you tend to be a procrastinator, you have a little bit of a false deadline, because it's like it has to be ready days before it really needs to be ready. There's not a chance. I mean, there just really is not a chance. And I've never seen it. And I've now done it hundreds and hundreds of times. There's not a chance it doesn't get better. I mean, the sermon is going to get better. It just always has. Not one single time can I think of a time it didn't get better. It's a simple idea, or 9 minds better than one operating in isolation. 9 people. I have older women there. I have younger women there. I have single people there. I have married people there. So different life stages, different challenges, different age groups, all the different demographics, and they're speaking into the message, making sure that we hit kind of all of the different life stages that people are walking in, all of the different challenges that they're carrying into the room. So they're there in addition to the communicators that we're training up. So those communicators are learning, those preachers and teachers are learning just by the feedback that other people are getting. 2, it enforces humility. And so for the lead communicator, like he's walking in there, I'll say I'm walking in there, and these people who work for somebody who works for somebody who works for me is just about to just tear me apart. And on some days they do, and it's a humbling thing and a sobering thing that I think is actually helpful. They've helped with creative illustrations. Hey, I don't like that illustration. Sometimes it's hey, let's move that here. I think your closer is actually a better opener. Hey, I don't know that that's what that verse is actually saying. I know this commentary over here says that, but I think a better understanding of that verse is this. Those kinds of things, they go through that process. And so it always gets better. The challenges that you're choosing with this model, honestly, is you become dependent on it. And so when you have to write a message without it, you feel a little bit like you're flying blind, because it's like, all right, when's my run through? And you kind of organize the whole week with the run through. And it also, I won't say it takes more time, but it takes more time of other people who are not the primary communicator. So
how do you not let that blow up your Friday and Saturday? Like, are you able to usually incorporate that Thursday by the time you head home for dinner, or how does that impact your workflow?
No, I set it, I set it on a shelf at Thursday. I don't touch it. I just let that feedback, I kind of leave it there, and I go on about my life. And I pick it up on Saturday for an hour, and I see what stuck from that time. I want the right things to stick. And so I took good notes too, but I just like, all right, what stayed with me? And then I make those adjustments and then redo it.
Are you still doing a direct to YouTube message, or did that switch when everything went back live?
We're still doing a direct to YouTube message.
And when do you film that?
Oh, maybe I don't understand the question.
I'm sorry, we're streaming. Like, you're streaming direct to YouTube, but are you doing a separate, like, edited, fast version? Okay.
No, we're not. I mean, that has turned into what's happened since last we talked is Reels, right?
Yeah,
they've really blown up, and so we take those snippets and we cut them down to try to have the big teachable moments, make it onto Reels, and then we'll push those through YouTube Shorts, TikTok, and Instagram.
Got it. Yeah, so that kind of took care of itself, didn't it?
Yeah,
I guess in that way.
I mean, I don't think it's a bad idea to take the message. Some of it was the nature of our video editing resources. We lost a guy that was just really masterful in his ability to edit those. But then he moved on. He's still here. He still attends, but he's no longer in that position. And so some of it's just the demands of the day, as you know.
Yeah. I get it. You only have so much time. You only have so much energy, and you've got a lot of momentum. Anything else you're changing or morphing as we speak in your model? Yeah.
I'm asking, what is the role that technology is to play in this? And I know that you've been at the forefront of asking that, Carey. I know that many leaders are asking that. I'm looking at VR. I'm watching ChatGPT and AI, and I'm saying, okay, all of these things hitting for such a time as this or at this time seem to have implications for the church. And I'm just trying to be prayerful and understanding what they are. I don't want to be behind the curve, but saying that right now feels like you already are, because it's moving fast. That train is moving fast.
I mean, by the time this airs, or secondarily, by the time someone listens to it months down the road, this could be a dated conversation. But for those who are listening in real time, have you tried ChatGPT? What are you seeing as possibilities, strengths, weaknesses? I'm starting to use it and really finding it helpful. We can talk about that more. But, as a creative, it also feels threatening, right?
Yeah, it feels like... and this may be so naive to say out loud, but it feels like as big as the internet. I mean, it feels like that level of discovery. I had it write a sermon. So not one I had any intentions of preaching, but just to see of its capabilities. I said, hey, would you write a 3-point sermon on this verse?
Yeah.
And it just spit it out in 20 seconds. And I thought, man, that is, wow. I think it could be really helpful right now in terms of when you get kind of creative block. Mm-hmm. So something to get you over that. I'm always hopeful that the creative's going to win, because we're going to figure out how to use the things that are a threat to creativity and use them to further creativity. And that's what I'm believing about for ChatGPT and AI in general. But, I could go to some weird places. I don't know where you want to go on this podcast, but I mean, there's a lot of risk.
Some weird places. I mean, I'm happy to do it. I mean, I'm seeing its utility right now. To timestamp this, we're toward the end of February 2023 when we're recording this, where I'm using it for brainstorming, first drafts, and ideas. That's sort of the 3 big buckets. Brainstorming meetings, I'll give you an example. So I often have to title posts I'm writing or emails I'm writing or whatever. And we've all sat in creative meetings where we're like, all right, let's come up with a good title. And a half hour later, you've got a couple of mediocre titles. Literally, and you can tell ChatGPT, give me 10 headlines for a blog post on cynicism and church leaders that will convert well and rank in Google. Boom. Like you say, 18 seconds later, you've got 10. And whether you use one of the 10 or not, I really love having those prompts, because I'm like, oh, I never thought about calling it that, or just that thought never occurred to me. So I might not use one of those, but it will launch me into something that I think could really convert. Or like, then you come down to 2 headlines and it's like, okay, which one has a better chance of converting in search? And it'll tell you. So you're not guessing. It's almost like your Thursday night thing, but an AI version of it, Thursday afternoon thing, but an AI version of it. And I've done the write a blog post on X, and honestly, it's pretty banal right now. But I don't know what ChatGPT 4 is going to be, but it might give me ideas I haven't heard, and then I turn it into my own words. That's about as far as I've gotten with it. I have asked it just yesterday, actually. I'm like, tell me about Carey Nieuwhof. And it was actually really good and really bad, because it got my date of birth wrong. Did it for my wife. It said she was born in the Netherlands. I'm like, where did you get that? There's nothing in her record. She was born in the US, lived in Canada, got that wrong. It got a friend of mine, it says he wrote a book. He hasn't written a book. I mean, so you can't rely on it for veracity at this point. But I mean, that's
It's
kind
only
of what
as
I'm
reliable
using it for.
as the data inputs,
Yeah, exactly.
Google says I'm 33 years old, so I wish Google was right. But
are you going to roll with that? I would roll with
yeah,
that.
it's what Google says. It's got to be true.
Yeah, it's actually ChatGPT has me 2 years younger than I am, which is great. Yeah. It's like, okay, but it's not true.
Yeah.
So, what? Any other thoughts about AI, preaching, ChatGPT? We can go down that rabbit trail.
I mean, I think the bottom line is it is a game changer, and we have to be aware of it. And even, I mean, it's going to have overlap into our craft, and I don't think we need to be threatened by it. I mean, we've read the back of the book, and we know where this goes, and God is sovereign over all of these things. But if there's a way, I have such a redemptive theology. And so anything that can be used for evil, it can be used for good. And I'm trying to run in front of these things and say, okay, how can we use these for good while remaining above reproach, and use these tools to further the gospel and build the kingdom?
Yeah. Yeah. So do you use it in sermon prep, or you're just experimenting right now?
I've just experimented. I used it in similar to how you have. I was writing a blog on Valentine's Day, and used it to kind of speak into that, and it provided some facts. I was like, oh, that's a helpful line. Okay, so let me take that idea and work it into this blog. And like I said, I had it, just really right now trying to understand what his capabilities are.
Yeah. No, but I think you're right. There's an inevitability to it. I never knew my grandfather well, who was from Holland. But my father said he was born in 1899. So he never liked to use tractors on his farm.
Yeah.
And the reason was he thought they weren't good for the environment. He thought they weren't good for the soil. So he used horses until maybe the 60s or 70s. And probably 60s, because he died in the 70s. You know what? He was right, but he was also wrong. Because nobody uses horses today, right? So you can fight it, or you can figure out how to cooperate with it. You can develop theology around it, and you can hopefully use it for good. And I agree, you know where it's going. Here, go ahead. You have a thought?
Francis Chan has a children's book about a tractor that they didn't know how to turn on, and so they would push the tractor. And it's a metaphor for the church, as I recall. It's been a long time since I read it, but and one day someone found the manual to the tractor, and they were able to turn it on and see that it actually works for you. It's not this thing that you have to push uphill. And so as you share that story, that's what I think about is how do we have these tools work for us and use them just to further the mission that we're already on.
That's a really great metaphor. I haven't read that book. So this is your first time as a lead pastor, right?
Kind of. I towards the end of Watermark, I was playing a lead pastor role at my time at Watermark, and so we were a multi-site at multiple campuses. I was there at the if it's okay to say primary or campus,
the Dallas location,
the first campus, and I was playing more of a lead pastor role there in transition.
What was your biggest surprise becoming a lead pastor?
I think that the layer of protection is gone. And so if someone's going to be on 60 Minutes, it's going to be you. And so as I drove down 35, which is the interstate here, moving from Dallas to Waco, it just felt like there was a covering that was being lifted off of me. And that doesn't sound super spiritual, but that is just in my fear and insecurity is what I felt in that moment. It just felt like, I am walking out of from beneath my protection, and man, the responsibility, the weight of that. We stepped into some debt, and so even that, I just felt that on my shoulders, the weight of that debt. Like it was the first time ever that I had preached underneath debt, and I understand the temptation that people would feel by not wanting to upset someone or to keep donors or those kinds of things. And I just didn't want to fall into that trap. I wanted to be faithful, but I was seeing some of that temptation for the very first time.
So I appreciate you sharing that. And anybody who hasn't sat in a senior leadership seat before, whether that's in ministry or CEO of a company, that's a very common response. And I came by it honestly. I mean, I started when I was 30, so I almost never didn't have this job in one capacity or another. Yeah. But there is that, like, I know one woman has said publicly, when she became a lead pastor, she felt like she had to write a note of apology to every pastor she served under going, I didn't get it until now.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Man.
yeah.
I relate to that for sure. I've apologized to a few people and just like, man, I did not understand. And I empathize for a senior leader I worked under many times now, because I was like, oh, I remember him having this frustration that I'm right in the middle of right now.
And now it makes sense. Yeah. Right. So a lot of Christian organizations, churches, even companies, they struggle to reach the next generation. You've done so well in that area. What do you believe are some of the most effective ways to engage and disciple young adults moving forward, and maybe how that's changed in the last 10 years?
Yeah, I give it to you in one word, and I don't love this word because it's been overused. And as I say this word, I think people will think they know what it means, and some will be right, but I think some will mean something different than what I'm implying when I use this word. And so, authenticity is a word. If you want me to put more synonyms around it, transparency would be another. And there's so much fake in church today, and some of that comes from production, some of that comes from a person, some of that comes from even the pressures. There you go, is a good 3P alliteration for pastor.
Well done,
production, pastor. Person, the pressures of like debt and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And I just like, man, this church is such an awful hobby. Like, this is not a hobby. Like, if we were just looking for a hobby, like, we should go race remote control cars or fly airplanes or whittle or something. But church is an awful hobby. And so why get into the church and play games? And so with me, it's like, man, what you see is what you get. Like, this is who I am. It's who I am on the stage, off the stage. I don't want to manage perception. I don't want to pretend to be someone I'm not, and that, for whatever reason, I think has attracted the generation behind me, if you will. And I've just, that's the only offense I know to run. And I didn't come into this with a lot of church baggage. I grew up Catholic. And when I became a Christian, because I wasn't a Christian when I was Catholic, just meaning I wasn't pursuing Christ. I didn't have a relationship with Christ. I didn't go to church in college. And then I was at a club 22 years ago where I began to hear the gospel and understand the grace of the gospel. And when I placed my faith in Jesus, it was just like, hey, I just erased the whiteboard. Like, my deconstruction looked like, hey, I'm going to forget everything I know and just start over and start to read the Bible like I'm on a deserted island and try to understand who God is in this. And as I, that just kind of allowed me to be, I think, at a healthy place with God and understanding of the scriptures and a biblical worldview. And so I'm just saying, hey, this is what God says. This is what I think he means. If you disagree with me, as long as it's not that, Jesus rose from the grave, hey, there's a place for you here. We can still be friends, and I'm going to continue to read this book and try to explain it based on the best of my ability, and be me, be who God called me to be.
Yeah. Do you think, again, we've timestamped this episode, Asbury, the revival there is still going on. You actually went there. Do you think that's a preview into Gen Z church, or do you think it's more of an anomaly? It's really too early to say. But I thought, hey, that's kind of an interesting question.
Yeah. I'll timestamp it even more and just say, we had celebrated Ash Wednesday today, and we had Stations of the Cross, and I'm a 144-year-old Baptist church in the country, just for context.
That does not do that kind of thing on a regular basis. Right?
It was 6:30 in the morning, 6:30 a.m., and it was just all reflective, no frills whatsoever, no band, no speaker. You walked in, you grabbed a sheet of paper, and it was a self-guided tour and self-guided, Stations of the Cross and reflective time. You received ashes and you could take communion. And it was all young people, man. I couldn't believe it at 6:30 in the morning. Now we are
6:30 in the morning.
We're near Baylor University, obviously, and I couldn't believe how many college students were here this morning. I just not what I was expecting. And then I had that thought about Asbury. And I do remember an article I read probably about a decade ago. The headline was, I think it was millennials are getting high in church,
Mm.
and they were just talking about how the next generation, the play on words there, high on church was like liturgy, high church.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so there's something about the reflective nature of days past that I do see a longing for in this generation. And Carey, I think what coincides with it is confession and repentance. And
Mm.
so with that authenticity and that transparency comes, out of that comes a real dealing with sin and saying, hey, this is what I've done. And where I think we spent a generation in secrecy under the banner of confidentiality. So we called it confidentiality, but I think it was actually secrecy. And we were permitted to keep things to ourselves or to ourselves and one other person. And what I think is going to happen in the church is you're going to see this purging of, hey, this is what I've done, and I do not care who knows. And I just, my God is bigger. And I think there's something really pure about that excites me. But that's what I'm seeing in the next generation, and some of what even I observed there in Asbury.
Yeah. Any other reflections on Asbury?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a work of God, and I'm not critical of it. We call it a revival. That name doesn't even bother me. We're just using the best words we have. I don't think you can really label a revival until you see the wake that is created from it. The tale that comes from the revival. So I would say only time will tell. But this outpouring of the Spirit, it seems, as best I can tell, authentic. And I would say, firsthand, as a follower, I've experienced it, and I just was in there. I got inside, and you want to experience God. And in so many ways, the desire to experience God is a distraction from actually experiencing God. And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, God, I want more of you. I want to experience you. I want to. What do I need to do? Put away my phone, open my Bible, And then he was just gracious to me. And I would say we started singing Agnus Dei, and I got to, what I would say, experience God, and I mean that in a real, tangible, emotional, sense, a personal sense. And so it was just something that filled my heart with the fruit of the Spirit. And so I was encouraged. I was encouraged by what's happening. We came back to Waco. We moved our 7 p.m. service, Carey, to Baylor's campus. And so we met there on the lawn in Baylor and worshiped and prayed. And that was all student led. I said, hey, I don't even want to be out there. I don't want to preach out there. I just want it to be of the students. And so some other pastors and we gathered behind it. And when I say other pastors, I mean of other churches. We gathered behind it, and we just prayed over those students as they were praying over that campus. Wow. And that's something I will say, to those in ministry that are listening. There's a beautiful thing happening in Waco where we just have such a great relationship with other pastors here. And so there's not a competitive spirit. We're all for each other. We're locking arms. We're seeking to build the kingdom together. And that's been really fun and really refreshing.
Yeah. So it feels more decentralized, a little more organic, a little less produced, and perhaps a bit less structured is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, all of those things are true. Consistent with my observations. It's not the way, and even the sermon that Zach preached, and I'm not here to poke fun at anyone's sermon. He said, so I talked to him, Zach Mearcreeves.
This is the guy who preached.
Yes,
leading into the what became known as a revival, right?
That's right. He preached a sermon on love, and he had taught 18 times in 2 weeks prior to that. So he just said, hey, I was done. I didn't have anything left in the tank. I asked the Lord for something. I got up and I said what I sensed, where I sensed he wanted to go. And I listened to that sermon, and it's not the sermon that I would have thought would have led to a revival. And he, again, I can say he said that. I'm repeating his words too. And it's just goes to show, man, our man's wisdom only gets us so far. And we have to walk in dependence. We have to walk in dependence with our Father.
I think I read online that he said that was a stinker. Like it just didn't work. To his wife, he's like, because we all have that report when we're done. It's like, I shouldn't have gotten up today. Yeah. And often it's in those moments that God really uses it the most. And other times we think we've crushed it. Nothing.
Nobody's there to talk.
Nobody.
You want to run another lap around the bases, and everybody's like, all right, I'm going home. I'm glad we went to church today.
So you got a brand new book called Why Do I Do What I Don't Want to Do? Congratulations on the book, JP. Paint a picture, because I think it's a really good contrast of your life before you came to Christ, after you came to Christ. So you've already mentioned growing up Roman Catholic, club scene and all that. But what was your life like prior to, becoming a pastor and, first being called to faith?
Yeah, I was raised on a farm in a small town in the middle of nowhere, South Texas. And then I went to a 2-year technical college in Waco. And so I always say I crammed, a lifetime of partying into those 2 years. I was running from God. God at this time was a kind of the sheriff in the sky that wanted to get me for doing something wrong. And I was doing a lot of things wrong. They say drugs, sex, and rock and roll. In my case, it was drugs, sex, and hip hop. And I was at a club. And so I moved to Dallas. I graduated somehow. And I moved to Dallas. And now I'm in the big city. And I've always wanted to be in the big city. And I start chasing the dollar, and I have different jobs. I started in the fitness industry. I'm selling gym memberships. I sell this guy this expensive gym membership, and I just say, "Hey, what do you do?" Because he spends a couple grand on a membership, and I'm like, "What do you do?" And he's like, "I'm in telecom." I was like, "It's funny, because I've always wanted to be in telecom, and I didn't even know what that meant at the time." And so, I, lo and behold, I get a job in telecom. I move my boss. I had some favor with my boss because I was selling. He went to another company, took me with them. That company went bankrupt, and I landed at AT&T and became a global account manager of AT&T. And so at this point in my life, I'm everything wrong with Dallas and a person. And so for context, Dallas is a very pretentious city. It really thrives on entrepreneurship because there's not really landscape there. There's no bodies of water or mountains. Like Correct. You're there just to make money. And so I live in a penthouse condo. I drive a Jaguar, wear a different suit every day, different watches to go with the suits, and I'm in the club on the weekend, getting bottle service and whatnot. And somebody invites me to this church. I sat in the back row, hungover. I smelled like smoke from the night before, and I really started wrestling with who is God. Because I thought if I was born in India, I'd be Hindu. If I was born in China, I'd be Buddhist. If I was born in Iran, I'd be Muslim. If I was born in Israel, I might be Jewish. And so what are the odds I'd be born to the right area to come to the right faith? And so I had this bias against Christianity, but as I explored it, I kept tripping over this character in history named Jesus Christ that I knew of, obviously, but I never realized he had reset the calendar that 2023 years ago, every atheist I know acknowledges him by the date on their iPhone. And I was like, man, how did this carpenter born in Bethlehem, a town I wouldn't even know of except he was born there, who lived in Nazareth, another city I wouldn't know of except he lived there, how did he become the single most polarizing character in the history of history? And I realized it's because he came back to life. He died and he came back to life. And when he died, I realized that was a payment for all the things, my sexual addiction, my drug use, my alcoholism, my materialism, my pretentiousness, my narcissism, all of those things. He was paying for those things so that I didn't have to pay for them in eternity. I trusted my life to him, and everything began to change in that moment. I mean, it was, for it is by grace you have been saved through faith. It's not of yourselves, the gift of God. It was the gift of God.
Mm-hmm. So big contrast. I'd love to know, once you became a Christian and particularly stepped into Christian leadership, what was the hardest vice to give up?
Yeah, so when I became a believer, some of the things went away right away, like my language. So I cussed like a sailor at the time, and it just there was just a heavy conviction on that. Things like pornography were slower to die. Now in the business world, that nobody cares, doesn't matter. It's like you go to the strip club to close deals. I mean, that was a common practice at the time. And you would take people there, you'd entertain clients. But in Christianity now, it's like those things, like people are praying for me, I'm finding healing, but you're still in corporate America. And so, Carey, I would tell you, I've been to the jungles of Africa. I've been to the jungles of Brazil. I mean, I've gotten on a boat, gone 6 days down the river to get off, to a tribe that we were told had never heard of Christianity. I've been to Haiti, rural Haiti, up in the mountains, Haiti, different parts of Mexico. The darkest mission field I've ever seen is in corporate America. I mean, it just, greed was so tangible there. Like everything we did was for the bottom dollar. There's no heart there. I mean, I tell people that I work with in ministry now that are not always professional, they'll be late or something. I'm like, you can't get away with that in corporate America because they don't care. They don't care. The big corporation isn't concerned about your 2-year-olds, whatever. And so I think that's the biggest one: greed, the pursuit of comfort, and the game, the perception management game. The entitlement is so like you feel, people would just get so upset because they felt owed something. So those are the things that are so prevalent there.
How does greed show up in ministry? Because you took, like a lot of people, a huge pay cut to go into ministry, right? You're right about that. It was like a 90% pay cut. You're making a tenth of what you made in corporate almost to start.
Yeah, man. It's just like in the business world, it's not everywhere. Meaning there are people with pure and right intentions. And I would say in ministry, it shouldn't be anywhere, but it still is. And I think one of the greatest evils in the world is this deal ministry leaders strike where they're like, hey, you show up and let me entertain you and you keep the lights on and in exchange, I won't ask much of you. And I'm like, man, that's not the church and that's not going to work. And we're going to end up in a story like in Revelations, Ephesus or something. We can't do that. And so I think there's a greed, we have a deep desire for followers today, and especially in the age of social media. There's a greed for people. I think we can focus on stealing people from other ministries.
To be growing.
For church growth can be an idol. And then there's the financial greed. I mean, you see it today in the church more than I ever have, and it's not reserved to particular denominations anymore. I mean, it really has bled into every denomination where it's like, hey, if you are one of the top leaders, there should be particular privileges that go with that. Some of those are right and holy. Some of those are really ungodly and unholy.
Yeah. How do you know which is which?
I don't know that you can by yourself, because we can be so self-deceived in the nature of a blind spot as you can't see them. So you have to, where that transparency comes in. And so I've got to have guys in my life that they know what I make, they know what I give, they know what I spend. I process big buying decisions with them. Today, I texted them about a car. I was like, hey, I was on this waiting list for this vehicle and it became available today. And I was just like, hey guys, is this still a good idea? Like, here are the specs, here's what it costs. Here's what here's where we're at financially right now. Is this still a good idea? Is this going to inhibit our ability to be generous? How much should I be concerned about the perception? And like asking those kinds of questions of those people. So I don't know that we can tell on our own. That's where I think those dozen proverbs that say wisdom comes from the counsel of many, everything in the scripture that's pushing us to real accountability, we have to have. We can't be self-deceived. We don't want that. Like every listener right now, there's a part of your heart that doesn't want that, and you will fail. You're going to climb to the top, and it's going to drop you to your death if you don't have people in your life who will tell you the truth. You have to have, and it can't be these one-off, phone calls, and a singular text here and there. It needs to be a consistent group of people that you're meeting with on a consistent basis, so that they're all hearing the same things at the same time, and they're able to feed off each other's feedback and to learn from each other. And then I'll go one step further. I think it's even better if those people are different than you, and so like meaning they just think different, they're wired different, their personalities types are different. I learn the most from people who don't think like I do. And so I try to always make sure that I have, that really structured person around me, because I'm not naturally the most structured person.
Yeah, let me ask a little bit more about that, because I think that is a great principle. And I think you're right. We all have random friends we'll bounce stuff off of, but to have a board, so to speak. On the other hand, JP, we also live in an age where people create fake boards. It's like, these are the rubber stamp people. And I realize you're not talking about something structural. You're talking about something more organic. But I can think of 4 people who would say, yeah, buy whatever car you want. And then other people who would say, oh no, you should buy like a 10-year-old used car.
Yes.
How do you go about selecting people who would be varied enough that you would get a more reflective answer, and then that would still tell you the truth?
Man, the person that's most valuable to me, well, I'm back up and I'm going to say there is a structure to it.
Good.
So I am talking about, formalizing this. I don't think these are different groups. It's a consistent group that you meet with on a consistent basis. And sure, like anybody can build this, cardboard board,
echo chamber.
This echo chamber of yes people.
Yeah.
Sure, you can do that. That's going to be a complete and total waste of your time. And that's going to fall in the bucket of perception management. And there's a harsh warning for you in Acts chapter 5 is what I'd say. But for me, who is most valuable to me, I say valuable in air quotes, like meaning they're most beneficial, is someone who understands the word of God. They fear God. They walk closely with God. They yield to His Spirit, and it comes out of their life like that. It's almost like I'm looking for the holiest people I can to be that. And holy people come in all shapes and sizes and different backgrounds and personality types. And so wherever I can get diversity in those kinds of things, great. But for me, I want someone who walks closely with the Lord. And some of that's going to be in and out of seasons. And that the older you get, the more you realize that is like, sometimes life kicks you in the teeth, and sometimes you're on the mat and people have to carry you. Sometimes they're on the mat and you have to carry them. But I find those guys, and then I'm assemble that board, and we call it a life group at Harris Creek. And then those are the guys that I'm meeting with every single week. And in fact, we meet twice a week, and we're on a group text. And that's the guys that I sent that group text to, is like, hey, here's the truck that's ready. Here's what it cost. Here's our situation. What should I do?
And is that mutual? Do you all bounce each other's stuff off, or is that like a personal board?
That's great. That's a great question. It is mutual. And so, and I think that's probably a big difference than maybe I was portraying initially. This is not like, hey, they exist for me. This is we exist for each other. And so when and it's interesting because not one of those guys, none of them are in vocational ministry. Now that's not by design; it's just happenstance. And so it's helpful because I get to give them they're building companies and selling companies and doing business and consulting and all those things, and I get to speak into that sometimes too, which is fun.
Oh, interesting. It sounds a little bit like what John Mark Comer has done in creating a little council or group for himself. So you, I would say, here's another tough personal question. Of all the vices that linger to this day, do you have a particular vice that's still like, this one's still nipping at my heels? Yeah. And maybe it'd be a good idea to list the 7 deadly vices that you talk about, pride being the biggest, but then you list 6 others. Then you've also got modern incarnations that I want to drill down into.
Yeah, so if I walk you through the progression of my life, initially when I became a believer, kind of go back to the question you asked earlier. Yeah. Initially, like lust is the one that was that lingered, and was a pitfall that I would be constantly and consistently tempted to fall into. As I kind of progressed in corporate America, and I had people praying over me in that area, then it became materialism. I feel like I got swept up in the current of Dallas, which is really just the current of our world. And I wanted, trinkets and treasures and stuff and status and all of that. I felt like materialism. Well, as I continued to, then went into ministry and there was different, it's kind of like whack-a-mole, different things would pop up, at different times. And, pride, I think is one as people start to listen to you, and they say, oh, well, now we're going to give you a microphone and we want you to talk to us and tell us what to do. And it's like, oh, wow, it's so easy to get puffed up, and ego has taken out many a pastor. And I think what's interesting though, as I have thought about it and reflected in creating this resource, is sometimes it's like whack-a-mole, man, in seasons. And it can be just like, oh, this one shows up. And so in the book, we kind of talk about the ancient battles, as you mentioned, and then the modern wars. And so in list form, it's pride, anger, greed, apathy, and lust. Those are the ancients. And then the modern ones are perception management, entitled, busyness, drunkenness, and cynicism. And so they all have counterpart virtues. So if those are vices in the vice category, they have counterpart virtues. And the reason I think that's important, and I know your audience is predominantly leaders, is a lot of times, as leaders, we talk about competency, but I think most of us would agree that character is even more important. That the any competency has to be built on a solid foundation of character. And when you're talking about competency, it was Marcus Buckingham I first heard, put your strengths to work. Don't focus so much on your weaknesses. Focus on what you're great at and build a career and opportunities out of what you're great at. Well, what if the character aspect is similar? I think in the church, we can focus so much on the don'ts. So don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. But what if we focused on the do's and we said, do become this, grow this in your life, focus on growing this. So in like lust, instead of fighting lust, if I grow self-control, and instead of fighting greed, if I grow generosity, what does it look like for me to become a bigger giver and more generous with those around me? And rather than focus on, the defense, I go on offense and I live the abundant life that Jesus calls me to. And I think that is transferable to any work organization, whether it's in ministry or in the corporate world, for leaders, because anyone who leads teams, you want to make sure your team is they're all practicing character. Otherwise, any one of them could sink the ship. And as we're training up those leaders, I think this has been an effective way. Is like, all right, hey, focus on the virtue. What is the counterpart virtue to the vice that we can pursue and grow in the virtue?
So greed is generosity, right? As a virtue.
That's right.
And so, the more generous you become, the less greedy you become. I find that too. I like to write checks that hurt. Do you know what I mean? I don't write checks anymore, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
No, I know what you mean. Digitally.
Swipes,
I like to transfer money that hurts.
Sure.
And I think that's a really good antidote. And then live considerably below means.
That's right.
Is good. Anything else on greed that you want to touch on?
I mean, it's just it's another form of lust. We always think of lust in the sexual sense, but it's wanting things that you don't have, and man, it feeds discontentment. And so we talk about entitlement in the book, which again, these are kind of like a really complex Venn diagram. They all have overlaps. And so the opposite of entitlement is gratitude. And I say gratitude turns what you have into enough, which is also a way to combat greed. And so I'm not just wanting to present to you and rub the reader's nose in their struggles. I'm wanting to give you a solution for each of these struggles, which I think is actually a pretty comprehensive list. Meaning, what I've learned in 16 years of ministry, and I'm curious if you agree, is it's not really a long list of things that take people out. It really is it's a smaller list of things. It's like, hey, if you're going to self-destruct, it's probably going to be one of these 10 things. And so if that's true, man, then identifying those 10 things, understanding which one I'm most susceptible to, that's invaluable to finishing the race, which we all want to finish the race. None of us want to self-destruct.
I agree. I think the big 3 and your 10 are subsidiaries of it. Sex, money, and power. It's sex, money, and power. It's always like something sexual that's completely inappropriate, non-consensual. It's money. You took stuff that didn't belong to you. You took too much. You were unfair. You were not transparent. Or it was power, right? Abuse of power, bullying, absorption of power, lack of accountability. It's sex, money, power, sex, money, power. And you're right. I've done a million funerals. I think I wrote about this and didn't see it coming. But when someone's lying in a casket or you've got their ashes in an urn and the family's gathered around, nobody pulls out a resume. Everyone talks about your character. Yeah. And sometimes they lie about it. Oh, he's a really good guy. No, sometimes, you meet with families and it's like, no, dad was a jerk. Or he really blew it when he cheated on mom. That destroyed our family. Or he was selfish. Like, you know, you hear these stories, and then you got to make up some sanitized version of the truth as you can for the funeral service. But like, that's all your kids are going to care about. And at the end of the day, all these people who follow you, follow me, they're not going to be at our funeral.
That's right. No,
my
they're not going to
be at my funeral. My kids are going to be at my funeral. My friends are going to be at my funeral. The community I've been a part of for 25 years is going to be at my funeral. All the other stuff, that's all going away.
Yeah, man, that ministers to me, bud, for such a time as this. Thank you.
So you do talk about rest and burnout, which is a really personal subject for me.
Sure.
Tell us your thoughts on rest and burnout in leadership.
Well, I've learned a lot from you. I will say that. And I think that, and you know, we can disagree on some of these things or have a great discussion on them. I think that burnout often comes not from doing too many things, like doing too much, but doing too much of the things you weren't made to do. And one of the things I learned from you is even like when you do it matters, like the time of day and when you have the most energy. And so I've learned a lot of that just from the resources. How did
that play out in your life? I'm curious. I'm always a student when someone applies that principle. Like
it's my best thinking comes at night. And
you're a night owl.
Yeah, and so I just feel like my brain gets really active when the sun goes down, and so it's changing seasons, Carey, because right now we have little ones in the house. I say little, students and basketball practices and baseball practices, and so I'm trying to figure out, and I'm in this season where I've been thinking a lot about this even this week, is how do I make sure they get my best, which is another thing that you've addressed through the years. And so like, what does it look like for me to make sure that I don't just deplete all of my energy in the professional environment and come home and give them the scraps? And so I've always, or on my best days, I'll take time to transition in the car just to stop for a minute, think. And I notice times where I get home and I'm on a call, and I have to go, and my kids are at the window waiting for me to get off the call, those days don't go as well as when I have that transition period, to move into that. And so the other thing is it's not early morning, but morning, kind of that 10 a.m. is a really productive time for me. And so that's something just in auditing what you created. And so I try to put, meetings drain me a ton. And
same.
Yeah. And so I try to, strategically place those in the right times of the day and have the more fun, engaging, creative meetings at that 10 a.m. slot. So
you're a go guy. Have you had a period of burnout in your life? Or if not, how have you avoided it?
Yeah, 4, 5, 6. I was 7 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago. I mean, I hit a wall at 100 miles an hour. For sure. I mean, that's why I know you. It's like you're desperate for resources, and people are like, read Carey. Sure, man. I mean, all of the things. I had just written a book. I started speaking. So I had this job that I always had, which was just working for the church, working for the church. Now I'm an author, and now I'm a speaker, and I'm trying to manage all of that. Plus, our kids are at a busy age, and marriage, and all of those things at once. It was just like I was carrying a load that I wasn't strong enough to carry. And everyone, all my professional life, people said, "Oh, he's so high capacity. He's high capacity. He's high capacity." Felt like my capacity got cut, and there was like an eighth of it left. And where one day I could carry, 100 pounds, the next day I could carry just much, significantly less. And I couldn't sleep, panic attacks, anxiety. I had taught on anxiety, but in hindsight, I was really teaching on worry, because this thing was a whole different animal. And my heart started skipping beats, literally, like physically. I messed up my heart, and so I had to go to the hospital. And I was just like, I remember sitting there. It's like, man, something is wrong with me. And they hooked me up to this EKG machine, and they're measuring my heart. And they say, yeah, there's some PVCs and PACs, premature ventricular contractions. And I'm like, can you fix it? And this ER doctor looks at me and she says, no, but you can. And wow. And I'm like, well, what do I got to do? And she's like, a whole lot less than what you're currently doing, And I'm like, okay, and so that was a big wake up call. I mean, I was 36 years old, and I was driving down the road. My left arm went completely numb, and I thought I was having a heart attack. And I was like, this is it, man. I don't get to walk the girls down the aisle. Like I'm donezo. And it was all related to that.
It's amazing, that whole line you said about everyone said you're super high capacity. And that's the thing about burnout is you're super high capacity until the day you're not.
Yeah.
And it gets taken away from you. And it sounds like we had very parallel experiences. Almost overnight went from, 60 to 0.
Yeah.
And what have you done in the last 6 years to guard against that? Because it's not like you're carrying less. You could argue you're probably carrying more, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you should have told me we were going to talk about this, Carey. No, I'm just joking. I'm just playing. I love it, man. I do. In part, and honestly, I moved to Waco, Texas, and I took over a church of 400. The first time I taught here, Carey, was there were 425 people here, and
that was easy, but it lasted about 4 minutes.
And everyone said, man, I bet you don't miss the traffic in Dallas. And I thought, man, I don't remember traffic in Dallas. I mean, I lived, 2 miles from the church, and I never really remember complaining about the traffic. I drive back into Dallas today and hyperventilate. I'm like, where did these people come from? And so there was just something to changing the pace. I removed responsibilities. I became very okay at letting people down. There was something for a long time where I just didn't want to let anyone down. And I remember in the middle of all of this, I'm preaching at Saddleback, and they're in some kind of heroes series, Heroes of the Faith, I think. And the guy goes up and he's like, man, that guy, like he was talking about me and said some kind things. And he was like, he's Superman. He looks like Superman. It's like the person who was doing announcements. And I just, you know what? I am not Superman. That's what you need to know, is I'm a chump from Cuero, Texas, with an associate's degree in art from a college you've never heard of. And I'm a servant of Jesus. And man, I am going to let you down. I'm going to say the wrong things. I'm going to do the wrong things. I'm not going to get things done. I'm not going to get things done on time. And I'm going to be as excellent as I can. I know excellence honors God. I know it inspires people, but I'm going to be as excellent as I can. And then I'm going to sleep well at night. And I'm going to live for, first and foremost, Jesus Christ. And then I'm going to live for the people that are going to be there at that funeral. And, if you're not even in the running of people that might carry that box that I'm in forever, or at least my body's in, then, I'm going to be okay disappointing you. And that's got to be okay.
You also talk about margin. I'd love your take on margin.
Yeah. Margin is helpful, right? And it's like, it's kind of the of course. Like if I have space to do whatever I want, like that is absolutely going to be beneficial. There's just some seasons where it's not realistic. And so I say, under the banner of letting people down is there has to be a list of priorities. So where I find myself and where margin is difficult is there's always more to do than time.
Yeah.
And so it's like the margin I have is not real. I mean, if I can create time and space for myself and to myself, but I'm really just delaying things that I need to do because they're not going away. They're still there. And there's always more to do than time. And so then I have to say, all right, what are my priorities? And that's been helpful to me, is to think in terms of priorities rather than margin. What are my priorities, and what am I okay not getting done today, so that I can run at a sustainable pace?
It's challenging. We're in the process of hiring an EA for me. And in the interview, I just said, basically, you're going to be saying no all day long. Like that's the hard part. We have so much inbound. How do you feel about that? And we want you to do it in a really thoughtful way, not in a sorry, but like, and the person we're looking at is super compassionate, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a part of me too that is still hard. Is it still hard for you to let people down, to say, no, I've got an email in my inbox now that I got to go back and say, I just don't have time to connect. I'm not going to make the time.
Man, I don't know why it is so hard. It is so hard.
It sucks.
But I think even that is there has to be a prioritization. And you do, I think one of, as your leadership quotient grows, you get really good at the short form email, the response that expresses the heart that I really want to be able to do this. I just can't. And I'm sorry. And man, thank you for understanding. But it's still very hard.
Yeah, it is tough. But you know what? I intentionally build margin into my calendar now. Yesterday morning, a great example. I had nothing on the clock for the first 6 hours. And I'm like, oh, good. I can stretch. I can imagine. But inevitably, crises come in. And I had a call from a guy that I coach. And he's like, I got a meeting in an hour and blah, blah, blah. And again, I coach like 2 people. So it's so small, right? Yeah. But I'm like, I got time for that. But if you're scheduled to the wall, you don't have time for that stuff.
Yeah, I mean that's the challenge I find with margin is there's always something competing for it, and so I have to think in terms of priorities.
So I've seen pride take out a lot of leaders. You've seen it. You write about it. It's a daily struggle for me, trying not to take credit for the things that God is doing in my life or through our ministry or whatever. How do you spot pride, and what do you do to tackle it?
Yeah, when I think in terms, and I don't know if this is what you mean when you say spot it. It's almost like, how do you see it when it shows up? And I would say it's always there. That's the thing for any leader, like for anyone with responsibilities. Pride is always there. You just have to identify it and keep it in check. And the biggest time, it's when you don't realize it's there. It's when you stop thinking about it being there. Yeah. That's when it gets you, man. I mean, that's when you're short in the meeting. That's when you respond out of anger. That's when you cope in one of those ways that's not above reproach. Those are the ditches. And so I think it's like, okay, how do I know that it's there. How do I find where it is? Because it's already there. It's not that it just pops up and I need to, it's like, okay, it's there. Where is it there right now? And how do I manage that? And so for me, again, back to those guys, that board of directors community, that life group, I'm meeting with them on a consistent basis. They're not impressed with me, Carey. Like they don't care. And in some ways, I'm just I am a burden to them in because of what I do. And so they're quick to show me where it is. My wife is also such a gift to me in that way. She's very humble and she's just such an agent of grace to me. And she's quick to say, hey, I don't think that's your best moment in the way that you just responded to one of our kids, or in what you said from the stage, like, hey, I would tweak that. I would change that. Or even asking me better questions like, hey, what's going on in your heart right now? That's how that's coming out, because out of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so you've got to have people in your life, woe to the man who falls and no one's there to pick him up. Solomon says, you have to have those folks that will help you identify it. And then so many of our other responses are just symptoms out of pride. Like I said, when we're short in anger, when we're seeking vengeance, when we're fantasizing vengeance in our head, when we're wanting to buy something that we can't afford or shouldn't buy because it's just going to feed a materialistic heart. So much of that is just coping for this age-old struggle of pride. C.S. Lewis says pride is the sin that made the devil. And I think it sits underneath all of our other struggles, all of our other habits. And we've got to know that it's there, and we got to find out where it is in that particular season, in that day.
I'm so glad you talked about perception management too. Yeah. I'm not sure our parents really thought a lot about perception management. If you made a mistake, you apologized to the person you made the mistake to, and you moved on with your life. And now, social media has amplified it to the point where you say one thing slightly the wrong way and it blows up online, or you got thousands of people following you and they're like, And so there can be a real tendency to want to manage your image. What do you have to say to leaders about perception management?
I think it's one of the greatest evils in the church today. And if you look in the Acts of the Apostles in the scriptures, you're seeing miracles and massive gatherings and momentum. If I was going to say it in one word, you see momentum. 4,000 people were saved. 5,000 people were saved. Peter preaches the gospel and this happened. It's just momentum. And then you have this couple, Ananias and Sapphira, and Barnabas has just sold the field and he brings the money and he lays it at the apostles' feet. And then this couple, they see him get all of this praise and accolades, and they say, man, we want that. And we want that praise. And so let's sell a field and bring the money at the apostles' feet. At least we're going to make it look like that's what we did, when really we're going to withhold some money back. And so they lie out of a desire of managing perception. And what you see in the scripture is this massive halt. Like all things come to a screeching stop. And speaking of funerals, they both die right there. And it is the harshest warning. It's like God is saying something to us like, hey guys, don't play this game. Okay? So you might get canceled for being real, but we're called Christians, like little Christ. That's what we are. Like we're little Jesus. Like Jesus got canceled in the most heinous way on the side of a road, nailed to 2 pieces of wood to his death. And so it's like we shouldn't be confused when people are upset at us when we're transparently following Jesus. And so, man, and you mentioned parenting, and I spent over a decade with the results of parenting, meaning like young adults.
Adult ministry.
Tens of thousands of young adults. I had a front row seat of watching their lives, and so much of ministry is pattern recognition, and I can just tell you the parents that were authentic, like they made disciples. The parents that were like, hey, we're going to go to church on Sunday, and kids will know what's going on. Like, they'll read between the lines. Oh, we're playing a game. Oh, we want to show them. We want them to think that we're spiritual. But when we go to lunch afterwards, no one's sharing the gospel with the server. No, we're not really inviting other people to our table. We're not sharing our home and our resources. Like the kids that came out of homes where the parents did that, they were just different, Carey, to a person. Like it was one of the clearest patterns. Parents who lived out their faith authentically, their children were drawn to that faith and lived it out authentically. Parents that were managing perception around faith, they raised kids who deconstructed, left the faith, went somewhere else. I'm not trying to shame anyone, because there's always hope.
Hear you.
There's always hope and hope for prodigals. And I was a prodigal, and we take way too much. We take way too much credit when our kids turn out good, and way too much responsibility when they don't. But I'll just say this perception management thing is serious, and we need to take it serious, and we need to stop it if we're involved in it.
So what would you say to the leader who is very carefully curating an image, managing perceptions, trying to make sure that they come across in a certain way? Because I see that online every day.
Yeah.
What's the answer? Just like, what's the answer?
The outcome that you want, that your desired outcome, it's not sustainable, and there's a way to get it faster, but there are risks. And so here's what I mean. You can manage perception and you can build an empire, but you can't do it forever. And the empire is going to come crashing down. And when it does, it's going to be loud. But if you just, instead of doing that, be who you are authentically, people are going to be drawn to that authenticity. Certainly the next generation is going to be drawn to that authenticity. At times, you're going to be misunderstood. Leadership is a commitment to being misunderstood.
Yes.
At times, you're going to be misunderstood. At times, they're going to say you were too honest. That's all going to happen. Those are the problems you choose with this path, but it's obedience. And then I'll just say also, I'm in some ways, this is a contradiction to what I just said, but you can't determine obedience by the outcome. And so I'll say two things. I'll say it works.
It's good.
But even if it doesn't work, it's still the right thing to do. So it just so happens that it does work. It is strategic. But even if it didn't, don't sell out. What does it forfeit a man to what does it profit a person of, gain the whole world and forfeit their soul, Yeah.
I think the thing, I get asked that question a lot about, how do you build a platform online? And I think, one of the pieces of advice I always give, I don't want to quote Oscar Wilde too much, but be yourself. Everyone else is taken. And there's a joy at this stage in life to be able to choose what I do, to have me just show up and do these conversations. Like, there's not really a gap between public and private. You get a good view into my life if you follow me on Instagram. And that's sort of what you get. And maybe I could be better if I was carefully marketed and sculpted or whatever. Yeah. But, it also helps you sleep at night. So I think I'm glad you went there. Anything else you want to cover or say that we haven't talked about?
Yeah, I would say to the person who's asking, how do I build a platform online? I would say be careful what you wish for. Yeah. And make sure that that's not just the end desire, that it's right. That it
do
is
something significant and share it. Maybe you get a platform, maybe you don't.
Well, it's kind of like the person who says, I want to be rich because I want to give away all the money. And I'm like, well, you don't want to be rich, you want to be poor. That's what happens when you have a lot of money and you give it away, you're left with none. And so it's like the person,
what are you
like,
giving now?
Yeah, exactly. And so and the same thing is true of followers. Like, how are you faithful with your followers now? And I think what I'm getting at, Carey, is I'm seeing something really interesting in the world of social media. And you and I heard somebody say this, and I was like, man, that's so true. Where it's like, if you champion a camp, you can grow followers really fast.
Oh yeah.
And so what's harder to do is to stay true to who you are and to stay honest and to not operate in the motive of wanting to gain followers. Because I think what can happen when we do that is we further the division that we see in society. The gap just gets wider and wider and wider and wider. Some of the biggest, like the days of, if we're just talking numbers, like the days of my biggest growth in followers have been when my critics have been the loudest. Because people who are critical of them will just run over here and say, "Oh, I'm on his side," and I don't appreciate it because I know that it creates more and more division, and I don't want division. I want peace and unity.
And if they found you in a fight, they'll probably leave you in a fight.
Man, hey, tweet that out, guys. They find you in a fight, they'll leave you in a fight.
Okay, that was just leading a church for 20 years, but you know this. If they've been to 3 churches in the last 5 years and they come to you and you're the best thing since sliced bread, guess what?
Matter of time.
6 months later, they're out the door. And I think that is such a good word. And it's weird. I've had more people tell me in the last year, oh, if you did that, you'd get a lot of clicks. And my immediate reaction is, I don't want those kind of clicks. Like, I'm not going to stir up controversy for the sake of stirring up controversy, because I don't want that quality, that kind of leader. Everybody's welcome here, but I'm not out to build a platform on what I'm against or, the siege mentality. It's like, let's just have honest, normal conversations and try to go from there. And believe it or not, just an encouragement to those of you who are wondering, listening, wondering, like, sometimes it works. Sometimes you can actually build an audience just being you and trying to make a contribution and a dent in the universe. And, in your case, trying to reach people in Waco, particularly young adults. In my case, trying to help leaders along the way. Like, it's okay. Just relax, man. Yeah. It's going to work out.
There's such a weird thing happening right now where everybody sees the world through a really narrow lens. And so I do something on Friday Q&A. We'll answer questions. And the other day someone said, why do you think Taylor Swift is hated by so many people? And I thought, what an ironic question, because I would think Taylor Swift is one of the most beloved human beings on the planet Earth.
In the world.
Like she's loved by more people. And I was like, oh, their perception is that she's hated because of whatever echo chamber they're in, what they're viewing the world through. And that's how we see it, is just like, as things get more bifurcated. The camps get bigger, and it's like you see people, you see the side that you want to see, and we rarely go around and see the other side. And it's an interesting science experiment, this social media thing.
Oh, it's hard to build yourself up long term by tearing other people down. I learned that years ago, and it's not fun. Well, the book is great. It's called Why Do I Do What I Don't Want to Do? Replace Deadly Vices with Life-Giving Virtues. JP, thank you so much. I appreciate your friendship, appreciate your leadership. Books available where anybody can buy a book these days, but where do they find you?
Yeah, at Pokluda is my handle most places, and it's just the first letter of my first name and my last name, and then jonathanpokluda.com. I don't love that being the website, but it's helpful to people. So
everybody calls you JP, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. JP, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Carey. You are a leader of leaders, and I'm grateful for you.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to hanging out again next time.
Yes, man.